Have you ever wondered what makes someone a great leader? Is it courage, wisdom, or perhaps the ability to inspire others? Now, imagine a man who, faced with a colossal challenge, took responsibility for leading an entire nation into the unknown. This man is Joshua, a name you've probably heard before, but maybe you've never fully realized how his decisions still echo as lessons for us today. In this video, we'll uncover 4 hidden lessons from Joshua's journey that can completely transform your approach to leadership. Stay tuned, because what you're about to discover might change everything. Welcome to the Curious Bible channel. Take a moment to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any biblical curiosity. Joshua never asked to be a leader. He started his journey as a humble servant, learning directly from Moses, the great liberator of Israel. From a young age, Joshua was an attentive observer. He didn't just listen to Moses, he absorbed every decision, every word, and every moment of prayer. He was present in the intimate moments between Moses and God, when the leader of Israel would ascend Mount Sinai. Although Joshua was not at the top of the mountain, he waited patiently halfway up, with his eyes fixed on his leader, understanding the significance of what was happening. He felt that somehow he was being prepared for something much bigger, even though he didn't know exactly what it was. Often, in our own journey, we don't understand the purpose of our steps. But Joshua, even without understanding the future that God had prepared for him, was being shaped for something extraordinary. Moses was the visible leader, but Joshua became the invisible one, the one who learned in silence through observation and service. And in this role, he stood out, not as someone who already had all the answers, but as someone who was willing to learn and serve, a fundamental lesson for any leader. While Moses led the people through the desert, Joshua was always close by, serving and learning. He didn't mind being in the background because he understood that his preparation wasn't just about being at the front, but also about being faithful behind the scenes. When Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments, who was with him, waiting patiently halfway up? Joshua. This seemingly small detail reveals something profound: his willingness to accompany and serve, even in the most challenging and solitary moments. Joshua knew that true leadership started with silent obedience and faithfulness when no one was watching. This was the foundation of his strength, but what truly set Joshua apart was his courage. When Moses sent 12 spies to explore the Promised Land, only he and Caleb returned confident that God would deliver the land into Israel's hands. The other 10 spies spread fear and discouragement, claiming the inhabitants of the land were giants and that victory was impossible. But Joshua, full of faith, was not shaken. He knew he didn't have a perfect plan or military strategy to face the giants, but he had something much more powerful. He trusted in God. He believed that with God by his side, no giant was too great. He saw the impossible as something that could be overcome, not by human strength, but by divine power. This unshakable trust in God is what made him stand out. Joshua was not afraid to face the reality of the challenge. He confronted fear with the certainty that God was in control. This unwavering faith was one of the reasons God chose Joshua to succeed Moses. When Moses died, the people of Israel were on the brink of a new beginning, but also of great challenges. They were about to cross the Jordan River and take possession of the Promised Land, but what they lacked was a leader who could guide them with courage, faith, and wisdom. And that's exactly what God saw in Joshua. He had already demonstrated his faithfulness to God and his commitment to the mission. God then spoke directly to Joshua. "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Joshua 1:9. Here lies the great hidden lesson. Joshua was not naturally courageous. He was not born with a leadership spirit, but with a heart willing to trust in God. He was an ordinary man, just like you and me, who also faced doubts and fears. However, the difference was that he chose to trust in God's promise. He wasn't driven by his own strength, but by his trust in God's words. This choice to trust is what made him an extraordinary leader. Even in the face of doubts and difficulties, Joshua chose to believe in God's word and act upon it. This courage is something we can all learn from. How many times have you felt small in the face of a challenge? Perhaps you've thought, I'm not capable of leading, or someone more experienced should be in my place. Joshua shows us that although challenges may seem like giants, what truly matters is not our strength, but the strength of God within us. He teaches us that true leadership begins with an attitude of trust in God, who is able to do infinitely more than we can imagine. As Joshua took on this immense responsibility, something even bigger was coming. He wouldn't just face external battles, but also internal challenges. How would he maintain the unity of a people who easily strayed? How could he ensure that the people of Israel remained faithful to God? The answer to these questions reveals Joshua's practical wisdom and how he used his experience of serving and learning to lead with humility and firmness. He knew that to be a good leader, he first needed to be a good servant, someone willing to listen and do God's will, even when circumstances seem difficult. Now, you must be wondering, how did Joshua manage to keep the people's trust and, at the same time, remain faithful to God's purpose? The answer to this question takes us to the next chapter, where we will see how Joshua's courage turned into practical actions that changed the course of Israel's history. And so, with the responsibility of leading an entire people, Joshua took the first steps toward the promised land. But how would he handle the pressure of being in command? And what strategies would he use to conquer the impossible? The answer lies in his first actions as a leader. Discover how his unwavering faith and choice to trust in God shaped the fate of a nation. Stay until the end, and you'll be surprised by the secret hidden behind this journey. The journey to the promised land would not be easy, and Joshua knew that. As he took on leadership, he faced a people marked by years of slavery, struggles in the desert, and constant complaints. The challenge was clear. It wasn't enough to be a strategic leader. Joshua needed to inspire confidence in a tired and often disobedient people. He was facing a tremendous responsibility that required more than wisdom and command skills. Courage, patience, and above all, unwavering faith were necessary. Imagine the scene. Joshua stands before the Jordan River, a river that must be crossed before Israel can enter the promised land. But there was a problem. The river was in flood season, with waters flowing violently. To human eyes, crossing seemed impossible. The river was wide and turbulent, and no one knew how they could cross safely. Any other leader might have hesitated, looking for an alternative plan or even retreating, but Joshua had something that set him apart. He had complete trust in God's promises. Before ordering the advance, Joshua did something crucial. He consulted the Lord. He knew that without divine guidance, the people would never succeed. Indeed, without God's intervention, any attempt to cross the Jordan would have been in vain. God then gave clear instructions. The priests were to carry the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence, and enter the river first. As soon as their feet touched the water, the impossible would happen. The river would stop flowing, and the people would cross on dry land. This instruction was not just a divine strategy, it was a test of faith. Think of the tension in that moment. Joshua had to gather the people and announce a plan that, at first glance, seemed insane. He knew obedience would be crucial, both his and the people's. He had to instill confidence in a people who had often shown a lack of faith. It was a collective test of faith, and Joshua did not hesitate to obey. He knew that trusting God's word was more important than understanding all the details of the plan. When the priests entered the water, exactly as God had promised, the river stopped flowing, forming a dry path. The people of Israel crossed the Jordan, with Joshua firm and courageous, leading every step. This event not only proved that God was with Joshua, but it also reinforced his authority as a leader. Now, the people of Israel had a concrete reason to trust Joshua and God's promises. Joshua's courage here was not just about facing the challenge of the river. It was about believing in something no one could see until it happened. He taught the people that faith isn't about seeing the entire path, but about taking the first step, trusting that God has already prepared everything. He knew that no matter how uncertain the future seemed and how gigantic the challenges appeared, if he followed God's guidance, victory was already guaranteed. Now, think about your own life. How many times have you faced a river that seemed impossible to cross? Perhaps it's a difficult decision, a distant dream, or a problem you don't know how to solve. The lesson here is clear. It's not about the size of the challenge, but your willingness to trust in God and move forward. When you place your trust in God, the rivers of life, no matter how tumultuous they seem, can be crossed. It doesn't mean the path will be easy or without obstacles, but by following divine guidance, you can be sure that God will be with you, just as he was with Joshua. However, crossing the Jordan was only the beginning. The true test of Joshua's leadership was yet to come. On the other side of the river, a giant wall awaited him and his people, the city of Jericho. Jericho was an impregnable fortress with walls so thick they seemed indestructible, and this time, God's strategy would be even more unusual. There would be no traditional battles or sieges, but a strategy that required even more faith and obedience. Joshua, with his unshakable trust, would need to understand that God's plans often defy human logic, but they always have a higher purpose. Have you ever faced a challenge so great that it seemed impossible to overcome? Something that tested your courage and faith to the extreme? Before discovering how Joshua led his people through a miraculous crossing, I want you to comment here. What is the greatest river you need to cross today? Perhaps your answer will inspire someone who is struggling with the same challenges. With the people on the other side of the Jordan, Joshua's journey as a leader was just beginning. He had earned the trust of Israel, but how would he lead an attack against a city as fortified as Jericho? And what would he learn about discipline and strategy in the process? Prepare to discover the surprising lesson of faith and obedience that would change Israel's destiny. Joshua and the Israelites were now faced with one of the greatest challenges of their journey: Jericho, a city known for its impenetrable walls. The walls of Jericho were not just physical barriers, they were also symbols of resistance and distrust from the inhabitants towards Israel and the God they served. For many, the idea of bringing down those walls seemed insane. They represented a giant obstacle, something no human army could overcome. However, for Joshua, the challenge represented another opportunity to witness God's power in action. He knew that, with divine guidance, nothing would be impossible. Before taking any action, Joshua sought divine guidance. He did not make hasty decisions or look for conventional methods of warfare or military force. In prayer, he received the most unlikely strategy. The Israelites were to march silently around the city once a day for 6 days. On the 7th day, they would march around it 7 times, and at the end, they were to blow the trumpets and shout. The walls would then fall to the ground. The strategy seemed absurd, something that could be considered irrational. But Joshua, with his unwavering faith, knew that by following God's direction, the impossible could become a reality. Imagine the moment when Joshua shared these instructions with the people. The plan did not seem to make sense, but Joshua knew that obedience to God would be the key to victory. He could not allow doubt or human logic to enter his heart. He needed to ensure that the people followed the instructions with discipline, without questioning, without hesitation. They could not doubt, for the victory depended on their total obedience, even without fully understanding the logic behind the plan. This is one of the greatest tests of leadership, convincing people to follow something that goes against all human expectations, based solely on faith and trust in God's plan. The days of marching were marked by tension and anticipation. The silence of the troops as they marched around Jericho was almost deafening, contrasting with the suspicious gazes of the city's inhabitants. They mocked and threw objects, but the people of Israel remained steadfast, not deviating from their goal, not losing focus. During these days, the patience and trust of everyone were tested. It was difficult not to react, not to respond to the provocations, but Joshua had taught the people the importance of following God's plan, no matter how hard it was. They kept marching day after day in silence, knowing that the right moment would come. On the seventh day, the atmosphere changed. Joshua's command was clear. When the trumpets sounded, everyone was to shout with full force, and so it happened. The sound of the trumpets echoed through the air, and at the exact moment when the people's shout joined in, the walls of Jericho began to collapse. What seemed impossible was accomplished before everyone's eyes. The city that seemed unbeatable and insurmountable fell to the ground. It was an epic moment, a victory that could not be attributed to human strength, but to the sovereign power of God. The obedience of the people and Joshua's trust in God were rewarded in an extraordinary way. This victory was not just over Jericho. It was also a reminder that total obedience to God's will produces supernatural results. Joshua showed the people that it was not about military strategy, but about faith, discipline, and submission to divine direction. God is not limited by human rules or conventional methods. He has the power to do the impossible. The story of Joshua and the conquest of Jericho teaches us that when we place our trust in God and faithfully obey His plans, even the greatest barriers can be torn down. Now pause and reflect. How many times have you encountered walls in your life that seemed insurmountable? Perhaps it's a professional obstacle, a complicated relationship, or a dream that seems out of reach. The story of Joshua and Jericho teaches us that when we follow God's plan, even the strongest walls can crumble. God has the power to transform the impossible into possible, but we must trust Him completely and sometimes follow a path that does not make sense to our eyes. But Joshua's journey was not over yet. There were more battles to be fought, more lessons to be learned, and unfortunately, moments when the people of Israel would fail in their obedience. Jericho, the most symbolic victory, did not mean that the war was won. What would Joshua do? When faced with defeat, how would he react to failures, mistakes, and disobedience? These challenges were part of the process of spiritual growth and leadership, and how Joshua dealt with them would reveal more about his character and trust in God. Have you ever faced something in your life that seemed impossible to overcome? Something that seemed so big, so insurmountable, that only a miracle could solve it? Stay with me, because what happened with Joshua and Jericho will show you that, with God, even the strongest walls fall. But what comes after this great victory could change everything. Are you ready to discover? After the overwhelming victory in Jericho, Joshua and the Israelites were confident. After all, they had witnessed the walls of a fortified city crumble before their eyes, a miracle that could only have occurred through divine intervention. This victory undoubtedly strengthened the faith and spirit of everyone. However, amidst the celebration and relief of such a great conquest, something was brewing in the shadows, something that, if left unaddressed, would lead Israel to one of the most humiliating and bitter defeats in its history. This danger was not from an external enemy, but something already present within Israel's own camp. It all began with a clear command given by God. After the walls of Jericho fell, God instructed that the spoils of the city be consecrated to Him, as everything there was considered cursed. No Israelite was to take anything for themselves. However, the greed of Achan, a man from the tribe of Judah, caused him to ignore this command. He hid a large amount of gold, silver, and valuable garments in his tent, believing that no one would ever discover his sin. But God, in His justice and wisdom, knew exactly what had happened. With this disobedience, Joshua and the people were about to face devastating consequences. Initially confident after the victory at Jericho, Joshua sent a small troop to conquer the city of Ai, believing that with little effort they would easily win. But against all expectations, the Israelite army was defeated. 36 men lost their lives, and the rest of the army fled in despair. The defeat was inexplicable and humiliating. Joshua, shocked, fell to his knees before God. He did not know what had happened, but he felt something was wrong. How could the people of Israel be defeated by such a smaller enemy? It was then that God revealed the reason for the defeat. There was sin in the camp. Someone had disobeyed His orders, and because of that, the people were paying the price. Joshua, feeling the weight of his responsibility as leader, called the people together and under divine guidance began a meticulous process to identify the guilty one. When Achan was finally exposed, he confessed his sin, and the people followed God's instructions to remove the curse. Achan and everything belonging to him were destroyed. This was a painful and difficult moment, but essential for restoring purity, holiness, and obedience among the Israelites. This experience left a powerful lesson. The victory at Jericho had nothing to do with the strength of Israel's army or military skill, but with total obedience to God. When that obedience was broken, defeat came, even against a smaller enemy. Joshua learned that leadership is not just about making strategic decisions, but also ensuring that the people walk according to divine principles. Disobedience may seem like a small thing, but its consequences can be catastrophic, and it is obedience that truly brings victory. Now reflect on your own life. How many times have you relied on your own abilities or allowed yourself to neglect what you knew was the right thing, only to face unexpected and painful consequences? The story of Joshua and Achan teaches us that small acts of disobedience can have great impacts, but it also shows us that it is possible to correct our mistakes and start anew. The lesson of Ai does not end with defeat. It is just the starting point for restoration and renewal of the covenant with God. After correcting Achan's sin, Joshua led the people in a renewed attack against Ai. This time, the focus was on the covenant with God. Joshua, now wiser and more humble, followed divine guidance, and with God's strength and wisdom, the city of Ai was completely conquered. This victory was a clear reflection that obedience and dependence on God are the keys to success, and that no battle is won without God's leadership. However, this lesson in obedience would not be the last that Joshua would need to learn. Joshua's leadership would be tested again, this time in a different context: alliances, deceit, and difficult choices. What would Joshua do when, faced with a new threat, he was confronted with the possibility of being deceived by those who claimed to be allies? Would he be able to discern the truth and make the right decision? With Ai finally conquered, Joshua believed the path would be clear for the next phase of Israel's journey. However, the challenges ahead would not come in the form of direct battles. When an unexpected alliance puts Israel's plans at risk, Joshua will be forced to make swift and wise decisions, learning a new lesson in discernment, prudence and the importance of always being alert to God's plans. Did you know that small acts of disobedience can lead to great defeats? What happened to Israel at Ai is a lesson for all of us. Even the slightest deviation can have devastating consequences. But here's the question: what's hidden in your tent today, preventing your victories? Stay with us and discover how obedience turned defeat into triumph. With morale high after the victory at Ai, Joshua and the leaders of Israel were confident that nothing could stop them. The promised land was drawing ever closer, and the nations around began to fear Israel's strength. This was the perfect moment for the Israelites to expand their dominion even further, but what they did not know was that invisible dangers were emerging around them. It was in this scenario that a clever group, the inhabitants of Gibeon, decided to use an unusual strategy: deception. The Gibeonites knew they stood no chance in a direct confrontation with Israel. Recognizing the strength and immense victories of the Israelites at Jericho and Ai, they quickly realized that the only way to save their city was to adopt an unexpected tactic. Craftily, they devised an ingenious plan. Wearing worn-out and patched clothing, carrying moldy bread and torn wineskins, they presented themselves to Joshua as travelers from distant lands, fleeing from a hostile people. Their words were carefully rehearsed, and their speech, filled with praise for the God of Israel, tried to convince Joshua and the Israelite leaders that they were being guided by a divine will to seek peace. They claimed that, having heard of Israel's victories, they wanted to be part of that divine protection. Joshua and the leaders, though suspicious, chose to act without haste. They were cautious at first, trying to discern whether the Gibeonites were being sincere, but in their hearts they lacked the most important element: consulting God. They based their decisions solely on the appearance and words of the Gibeonites, without seeking divine guidance through prayer or any other means of spiritual discernment. At that moment, Joshua and the leaders decided to make a covenant with the Gibeonites, guaranteeing their safety and accepting them as allies, unaware that they were being deceived. Days later, the truth came to light. The Gibeonites were not from distant lands as they had claimed, but rather inhabitants of a nearby city located within the land that Israel was supposed to conquer. This revelation caused great frustration for Joshua, as the covenant now placed them under Israel's protection, making it impossible to destroy the city without breaking the oath made before God. Imagine the anguish Joshua felt when he realized that his well-intentioned decision had been manipulated by the Gibeonites. Still, Joshua demonstrated a valuable leadership lesson. He did not break the covenant, even knowing it was made under false pretenses. For him, the commitment made before God was sacred, and he refused to act contrary to it. However, he also took steps to ensure that the Gibeonites would never be a threat to Israel. They were assigned humble tasks, such as water carriers and woodcutters, placing them in a submissive condition, which weakened any potential future threat. Joshua used the wisdom gained from his experience to minimize the damage of his failure. This story teaches us about the importance of spiritual discernment. Joshua trusted his own judgment, but by failing to seek God's direction, he fell into the trap set by the Gibeonites. How often in our lives do we make decisions based solely on what we see or hear without consulting God? Like Joshua, we can avoid many mistakes if we prioritize prayer and dependence on God before acting. The decision not to consult God, in this case, caused great turmoil. But Joshua, with humility and wisdom, used the circumstances to teach the people of Israel about responsibility, honor, and commitment. Even in making a mistake, he demonstrated that when dealing with the consequences, he could remain faithful to God, correcting the course of the nation. However, this unexpected covenant brought new challenges. The other kings in the region Upon learning that Gibeon had allied with Israel, united against the city, they decided to attack the Gibeonites in an attempt to weaken Israel's strength, forcing Joshua to intervene. Joshua found himself in a delicate position as his loyalty to the covenant now required him to face a coalition of powerful kings. This battle, which would become a significant milestone in Israel's history, would further test his leadership, courage, and faith. When the enemies united against the Gibeonites, Joshua found himself in a distressing situation, having to fulfill his promise to protect his new allies while facing a battle against a coalition of powerful kings. At the same time, he knew that his trust in God was the key to winning once again. Fulfilling the covenant meant confronting a formidable military force. But God was about to do something magnificent, showing that with him on Israel's side, victory was guaranteed. Have you ever made a decision based only on appearances, only to realize you were deceived? That's exactly what happened to Joshua and the leaders of Israel. But what would you do in such a situation? Is there a way out when we make mistakes? Share your opinion below after watching the video. Your thoughts are very important. The call to battle came unexpectedly. The Amorite kings, enraged by the alliance between Gibeon and Israel, decided to unite forces to attack the Gibeonites. It was a coalition of 5 powerful kings against a single city. In the face of this threat, the Gibeonites sent a desperate message to Joshua. "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly and save us." Joshua knew he had made a commitment, and now it was time to honor it. But this would not be an ordinary battle. 5 armies against Israel seemed like an impossible challenge until God intervened with a promise that changed everything. "Do not be afraid of them. I have delivered them into your hands. Not one of them will be able to stand against you." With this divine assurance, Joshua led his army on a nighttime march, surprising the enemies at dawn. The attack was fierce, and the enemy armies began to retreat. However, the true spectacle was just beginning. As the enemies fled, God sent a hailstorm that fell upon them with deadly precision. More men died from the hailstones than by the sword of the Israelites. But there was a problem. The day was ending, and the battle had not yet been finished. Filled with faith, Joshua made one of the boldest prayers ever recorded in the Bible. He stood before the people and cried out, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon." And something extraordinary happened. The sun stood still in the sky, and the moon remained motionless, allowing Israel to complete their victory. Imagine the impact of this miracle on the people of Israel and on the enemies. Never before, nor after, had there been a day like that when God obeyed the voice of a man. This demonstrated once again that no matter the size of the challenge, God is capable of intervening supernaturally to fulfill his purposes. This battle teaches us profound lessons. First, Joshua shows us the importance of honoring commitments, even when they are difficult. He could have ignored the Gibeonites' plea, but he chose to be faithful to his word. Second, we learn that true leadership is in recognizing our dependence on God. Joshua did not hesitate to ask for a miracle because he knew his victory came from the Lord. Think about your own life. How many times have you faced situations that seemed impossible? Joshua reminds us that when we trust in God, there are no limits to what he can do. Sometimes all we need is the courage to make a bold prayer and faith to believe that God can answer. After this monumental victory, Joshua's reputation as a leader grew even more. He had demonstrated not only his skill as a military strategist, but also his complete trust in God. However, the work was not yet finished. There were more territories to conquer, and Joshua would need to continue leading the people with wisdom and determination. The victory over the 5 kings was a milestone, but Joshua knew the journey was far from over. What would come next would test his patience and strategy. As the challenges became more complex, Joshua needed to ensure that the people remained faithful to God's promises. Would he be able to maintain the unity and faith of Israel? You'll only know if you continue watching this video. After the impressive victory at Gibeon, Joshua faced a new challenge, uniting the people for the next stage of conquering the Promised Land. The journey was not just about defeating enemies, it was about shaping Israel into a solid nation, faithful and obedient to God. With each step taken, it became clear that keeping the people aligned was as challenging as winning the battles. Israel was a nation made up of different tribes, each with its own characteristics, leaders, and priorities. While some tribes were eager to move forward, others wanted to rest and enjoy the territories already conquered. In this scenario, Joshua had to demonstrate an essential aspect of leadership, the ability to unite different voices around a common goal. In a pivotal meeting, Joshua gathered the tribal leaders and reinforced the divine purpose behind their conquests. He reminded them that the land was not just a prize to be divided, but a promise from God that required obedience and faithfulness. He said, "It is not by the strength of our arm that we have won, but by the mighty hand of God. If we turn away from Him, we will lose everything we have gained." These words served as a warning to a people who easily forgot where their strength came from. Joshua knew that as long as God was the center of their lives, no enemy force would be able to defeat them. But he also knew that the human heart is fragile, and the temptations of the conquered lands could divert the people from their purpose. During this period, Joshua began delegating responsibilities to the tribes, ensuring that each played an active role in the conquest and organization of the territories. He did not just give orders. He listened to the concerns and suggestions of his leaders, creating an atmosphere of cooperation. This ability to balance authority with empathy solidified his role as a respected and beloved leader. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were internal tensions. Some tribes complained about the land distribution, while others questioned past alliances. Joshua faced these issues with patience, but also with firmness. He reminded the people that their mission was not just for their individual benefit, but to fulfill God's plan for the nation. And throughout this process, Joshua continued to be an example of devotion. Whenever difficult decisions arose, he sought God in prayer. He knew that his leadership was not about controlling the people, but about guiding them in the direction God wanted. This constant dependence on God was what made Joshua not just a military leader, but a true shepherd of the people. The unification of Israel teaches us that leadership is not only about external achievements, but about building relationships and aligning hearts around a greater purpose. Joshua shows us that to lead well, it is necessary to balance strategic vision with a genuine connection to the people and to God. As Israel prepared to advance, the focus was clear. Each tribe needed to be aligned with the divine purpose. Joshua knew that true victory was not just in possessing the land, but in living in a way that honored the God who had promised it. With Israel united, the path seemed clearer, but the greatest challenge was still to come. Joshua needed to ensure that the people would never forget who had led them to this point. How would he do that? Get ready to discover the most exciting moment of his leadership. Time was passing, and Joshua knew his journey was coming to an end. The promised land had been conquered, but the work of establishing a nation faithful to God was far from complete. He had already led the people through remarkable victories and impressive miracles, but now the greatest challenge would be ensuring that future generations followed the path that he and Moses had laid out. In one of the final moments of his life, Joshua called all the people of Israel together. He gathered them for a great council, where with a firm voice full of wisdom, he spoke about the importance of not turning away from God, even after all the victories and accomplishments. "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But you, What will you do? Whom will you choose to serve? The gods of your ancestors, or the God of Israel, who brought you out of slavery and led you here? These words deeply resonated in the hearts of the people, who in unison responded, "We will serve the Lord." Joshua then made a covenant with the people, writing down his words in a book and raising a large stone as a witness to Israel's commitment to God. The covenant was established, and Joshua's legacy as a leader would not be forgotten. He had not only conquered a land, but also built a solid foundation of faith for the future of the nation. But Joshua knew that as much as he had fulfilled his role, the true responsibility lay in the hands of the people. They would need to be diligent in keeping their faith in God and following the principles that had been taught to them. And although he was about to depart, Joshua knew that God would continue with Israel. His leadership had been crucial for that moment, but his greatest lesson was in faithfulness to God, commitment to truth, and the power of unity. When he passed away, Joshua left a legacy that would endure for generations. His leadership was marked by courage, unwavering faith in God, and the ability to unite a people around a common purpose. He had been both a warrior and a shepherd. He led in war, but also in peace. He showed that true leadership is one that places God at the center, respects divine wisdom, and above all, serves the people with humility and dedication. The story of Joshua is undoubtedly one of courage and faith, but it is also a story of lessons that can transform our lives. After all, true leadership is not about positions or titles. It is about inspiring others to follow God's purpose and live according to his principles. And now, with Joshua's legacy firmly planted in the history of Israel, the question becomes for you: how can you apply Joshua's lessons in your own life? How can you be a leader where God has placed you, whether in your family, your work, or your community? The story of Joshua teaches us that leadership is not about power, but about service and faithfulness to God. No matter how great the challenge, with faith and courage, we can face any obstacle. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about Joshua's lessons? How can you apply these principles in your life? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to like and share this video with friends who could also be inspired by this incredible biblical story. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now to keep learning more fascinating stories and powerful lessons from the Bible. See you in the next video. And remember, true leadership begins with God.